A warm welcome to you all, and a very, very happy New Year. Firstly, hope 2021. Hope it's a good feeling to leave 2020 behind, isn't it? I wish you all and your families a wonderful, wonderful new year, and hope this is a much better year. So I'm delighted that we are kicking off our monthly series. You know, we meet once a month. My name is Namita Datta, and I am Program Manager of Solutions for Youth Employment. It's a global program that's hosted in the World Bank and brings together a large number of partners. There are, just very quickly, I think a lot of you already know S4Y, but just very quickly for those who are joining us for the first time, it's a large global program focused on youth employment and solutions particularly. So a big focus for us is on innovation. What are the new things that are happening in this network of youth employment stakeholders? And there are 4 different parts of our ecosystem. We have a steering committee on top, of course, but there is the impact portfolio, and several of you are members of the impact portfolio. It's a network of 44 youth employment programs that are not World Bank programs. They are run by very interesting, innovative organizations, and they're all doing something particularly innovative. That's how they were selected. And this is a learning community, very robust, very vibrant, and we also learn a lot from some of the discussions that we have with this community. So that's called Impact Portfolio. The second part of our network is an internal one. In the World Bank, the youth employment agenda is spread across different global practices, the digital development teams, urban development teams, private sector development teams, agriculture teams. They all care about this agenda. And so internally, it was important for us to create a network. It's about 150 operations of the World Bank that focus on youth employment, and we in S4Y we try and bring that community together so that we are also constantly learning from each other. It's about $17 billion collectively that the bank invests in youth employment. So that's the second part of our ecosystem. The third, and I think probably one of the most exciting parts of our ecosystem, it's a new one, is what we call our Private Sector Advisory Council. These are leading private companies that are passionate about addressing the youth employment agenda. Each one of them are doing something really innovative, interesting, wanting to do the right thing. And this community, it's about 35, 40 private companies, leading companies, a lot of them technology leaders in the world. And what we do with this community really is, this is an example. So once a month we come together, and a member of this community, today it's Facebook, sharing with us what they're doing. Sometimes it's a brand new initiative that's about to kick off, and there are no results yet, but they just share what they're doing, and then there is interaction. So that's the third part of our ecosystem. And the fourth is what we call our advisory group. So these are young people. We wouldn't be focusing on youth without making sure that we are also listening to young people very carefully. So these are 17 young people that we selected, each one of them coming up through very, very adverse circumstances, but today doing something fairly innovative, entrepreneurial, in very difficult parts of the world. Several of them are in Africa, and they join us regularly and provide feedback. They also join our board meetings and give us feedback on the strategic priorities that S4Y should adopt. Okay, so that's quickly a recap of S4Y. And this particular series, the webinar that we have today, is part of our Private Sector Advisory Council. As I said, we focus on something that one of our partners is doing. And the objective is to really learn from each other. And, these are usually very, very high rates of attendance for webinars, by the way. And usually this leads to a good conversation. And then in some cases, we are noticing that it also leads to very concrete partnerships. It sparks off with a conversation that happens here and then leads to an actual partnership on the ground with some of them. So I'm really excited today that we have two wonderful panelists that have agreed to share with us their insights. So Ariel Gross Samuels, who is the head of global business strategy and engagement at Facebook, is here with us. Welcome, Ariel, and thank you for joining us. And we also have Hyacinth Vessel, who is the Vice President of Innovation Engineering at Association for Enterprise Opportunity, AEO. It's an NGO. And I'm so delighted that Hyacinth is also able to join us today. So we'll do this as a conversation. And I request you all to keep yourselves muted so that we don't have any technical echoes and sort of technical issues. But feel free as you hear the conversation evolve. Just put your comments in chat as it goes along. And towards the end, we'll open it up, and hopefully we have enough time for a good discussion. We are recording this because a lot of our partners, by the way, I should say this, that, usually it's about over 100 people who join us for these webinars. There's a lot of interest in these webinars. And several people write to us saying, oh, I have another meeting, I can't come to this, but could you please send me a recording? So we've realized over time that recording it actually really helps for people who are not able to make that particular time. But today, I think is... by the way, I should say that a lot of people, colleagues, at least in the bank group, are still on winter leave and just trickling back to work. And so I hope more people will join eventually. But a lot of them have already written to us saying, please send us the recording. Okay, I need to keep quiet now and hand it over to Ariel from Facebook. Ariel, over to you. And maybe you could kick it off, Ariel, by just... sharing with us. So, by the way, yes, before the focus today, what we're trying to get at today is what Facebook and AEO are doing, particularly to unpack the agenda of inclusion. Like, how do we design programs where we especially are intentional about bringing along or reaching sections of our community that usually sort of get left out, left behind, or have particular challenges and constraints that sometimes we are not aware of when we are designing programs. Or even if we are aware of, it's hard to reach and include sections of our community that get left behind. So today our focus is going to be on women-owned businesses, but also businesses that are owned by minorities, people who are underprivileged generally. So how do we make sure that our programs reach them? So over to you, Ariel, and maybe you can kick this off by sharing with us a little bit what you do, what Facebook is doing for women-owned businesses. So over to you.
Thanks so much, Samit, for joining us today. It's a real honor to be here with you. I really appreciate the time. So let me start by saying that at Facebook, our mission is to give people the power to build community and to bring the world closer together. So it's literally in our DNA to be building with inclusion from the beginning. We serve a global community of 3.2 billion people and over 200 million. When we think about women and the fact that we represent half the population, a lot of the building that we do is built around how can we help them thrive? How can we help them grow, especially their business ventures, initiatives, entrepreneurial spirit on our platform. So I'll give you a few examples and we'll get through more illustrations as the deck we present goes. So first is She Means Business. This is a program that we launched in 2016 specifically to help women grow their business on our platform. Women with entrepreneurial tendencies in every corner of the world can help educate themselves, build a community, and connect with each other. So we've reached 1 million women and counting in 38 markets around the world, and we're really proud of this community and the way that it's grown over the years. We also have a program called Pragati, which is based in India. This is very much focused on entrepreneurial spirit in India, particularly for women who are launching their first business. So we have education and community building, but also grant funding. So we try to think about how can we help women at scale, 1 million plus, but also more local solutions for women. With that, let me turn it over to Hyacinth to get her perspective on this as well.
Yes, we can't hear you. You're probably still muted.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ariel. So just to give a little context of AEO, we're an association. Our goal is really to create economic opportunities for underserved entrepreneurs throughout the United States. We engineer transformational change through research, our incubation, our convening, and our advocacy to foster a robust ecosystem. Our vision is really to help every individual to have access to the resources and services for creating wealth, assets, healthy communities through business ownership. So I'm very pleased to be part of this discussion and look forward to really sharing some more with you guys.
Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Ariel. So maybe Ariel, just a quick follow-up question. When we last spoke, you mentioned that this entire initiative that you have for women-owned businesses, the series of initiatives, as you mentioned, is sort of the framework for it is the SDGs. So maybe you could just elaborate a little bit how you connect to the SDGs in particular.
Yeah, this is a great question. So for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, the United Nations has international mandate on 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the goal is for $12 trillion in market opportunities if we were able to get this right. So huge opportunity, huge upside. Now, the way the mandate this was originally, it was for governments of countries to take action. And so part of the art is how do we interpret and translate this set of mandates to the business audience, to private and public sector, and what can we do to effectuate change? So in 2015, Mark Zuckerberg went to the United Nations General Assembly. He committed Facebook to the SDGs. And I'm going to share articulate how do we activate around them, and specifically around Sustainable Development Goal number 8, which was decent work and economic growth. So let me share my slides. Hopefully everyone can see this. Can I get a thumbs up? All right. So first of all, our vision here is to really help businesses accelerate actions that will yield more diversity, equity, inclusion, social good as part of their future. So we're very focused on turbocharging action on tangible builds that businesses can do to drive a better future forward, to build back better, particularly coming out of this global pandemic. And this aligns with Facebook's priorities and our value system on making progress on major social issues primarily. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's great. Like, why does it matter for business? I mentioned the $12 trillion number, which I think is pretty huge, but also customers care. And so when you think about why should businesses snap into this SDG framework, 60% of people surveyed said that how a business responded to COVID implicates their desire to purchase from that business, to be a customer of that business. Nearly a third would recommend a business based on its value system and its overall compass. So we're seeing it's no longer a nice have. This is a must have for businesses to take a stand and to snap into one of the Sustainable Development Goals and to really care about these causes. So when we looked at these SDGs, which you'll see on the left here shown, we thought, okay, where can we play, right? Where can we provide differentiated value? What can we do to really make an impact? And we selected Sustainable Development Goal 8, which ties to our focus on small business, which is the heartbeat of our economy, and particularly our economic growth, especially coming out of this pandemic. And it's worth noting that well before COVID, we were already seeing some trouble business to thrive, whether that was financial volatility and security associated with economic growth. And so there's only more importance and urgency to SDG 8 now. So when we think about this goal, the question is, well, how do we measure impact? And this is an ongoing question that we're actively thinking through. But the SDGs have these indicators. And so we reviewed the sub indicators to identify where and that diversification of work and productivity and the next generation through opportunities. So I'll give you just an overview of our commitments around SDG 8 to date, which is around digital access, educational resources, business equality, youth unemployment, and the gender gap. Digital access, pretty exciting work. We are investing in infrastructure in sub-Saharan Southeast Asia and Latin America. We're literally laying down submarine cables and investing in edge networks to bring people online, especially for folks who are within reach of a 4G network. Our calculus shows that for every 10 people who get connected to the internet, one lifts out of poverty. And we think this is going to yield $200 billion over the next 5 years. So I'm really bullish on this. Second is resources. A lot of small businesses say to us, we want to grow our business, we want to do more, but how? We're trying to curate resources that are always on, that are free of charge, that are accessible for businesses to use and to grow. So we have Blueprint. This is a catalog of online where we've already reached 2 million people since its launch in 2015. It's self-serve. We have Coursera. This is a partnership that we have around a social media marketing certificate. So this is for businesses and communities that want that accreditation and believe that having that sort of more formal stamp is going to be useful for their growth and career. And we have a program called Elevate. This is specifically focused on Black and Latin, and it's around community engagement, education, mentorship, and empowerment, and has really taken off. Business equality. This is a particular focus area for my team. So what we saw in Q1 of 2020 was that businesses were being decimated at 2x the rate of non-diverse businesses. And privilege from stockpile and recognize that this is during a lockdown situation. And so we assembled several programs to help achieve just that. One is that we committed $100 million to Black-owned SMBs, nonprofits serving the Black community and creators. We also committed $100 million to Black suppliers in our supply chain that we're renewing annually. We are issuing 100,000 to Black students with Blueprint and invested over $5 million in racial justice organizations. And beyond cash, we are also focused on our product suite and our people, our human capital. So from a product perspective, we now have dedicated in our Facebook feed for Black communities with Black voices and share Black stories. And we've made hiring bets that by 2023, half of our workforce will be from underrepresented communities and a third will be Black in leadership positions. So we take this really seriously. These are meant to be evergreen, ongoing commitments, but we did mobilize quite a bit of momentum, particularly in 2020, to help really bridge the gap around COVID. Youth unemployment. So this is now shifting to that 8 target. We partner with 20 other companies for the Global Alliance for Youth. This was founded by Nest and is helping students thrive and particularly get smart on STEM. Our goal is to help 15 million people build digital and STEM careers, both by 2022. Very near and dear to my heart. I have an engineering degree, and so I always sort of preach the upside benefit of STEM background because I think it is so marketable in today's global economy. And so I'm really hopeful that this program is able to. And what an economic forum here, and I run this video to play. Oh, let's see if this works. Maybe not. But basically what we did is we created a messenger bot and an avatar to reach people. So what we recognize is that young people aren't at the World Economic Forum, but we are able to bring dialogue and the interesting conversations happening around executives to them directly by using our product. So we built a messenger bot avatar called Messenger and launched 2,000 young people and help support 70,000 messages and 130,000 views of the live roundtable, which was really powerful, I think, for reasonably well on your screens here on the right. And then closing the gender, this is super important. So, many of you probably saw the news that in the United States in December of 2020, 140 jobs were lost, all of which were owned by women. So what we're seeing is that particularly COVID is impacting women in really meaningful and serious ways in terms of holding them back. And so the biggest call out in some of these programs, but the biggest call out I would leave you with on this is how can we better our data to understand what women need and gender nuanced lens in the programming and in the work that we do. So right now we have a number of surveys on our platform to really understand gender equality and the needs of women specifically. And we're provisioning that data back to the United Nations in an ongoing way such that we can build together and collaborate on solutions that will help women thrive. So the matter to Facebook, to me personally, and hopefully to all of you as a mandate that we can forward. I think this is going to be even more important coming out of COVID as we build back better. And Facebook is committed to this for the long term and hopes that the benefits that we were able to achieve with these SDGs are shared equally by everyone. So with that, let me turn it to Hyacinth to go through some of her slides.
Thank you. So some of the work that Ariel has gone through, it was important that when we're looking at applications for programs for women and minority and Black-owned businesses, that biases were not present in the application process. So one of the things what I'd like to do is just to give you a sense of what some of those biases are out there. Everyone has biases. It's just being a bit more conscious about them and bringing them to the forefront. These are underlying attitudes and stereotypes that people unconsciously attribute to other people or groups of people. And these biases affect how a person understands, engages with a person or group. And it also affects how you look at applications or how you would review a business or where the business is. Some of those examples of some of the biases are contrast bias. That's when you're comparing two or more things that you have encountered. So you may compare an application, for instance, of a business that's more mature, that's had more resources, to a business that has not had the resources and may then favor that other business. Affinity is also known as similarity bias. Is a tendency for people to connect with others who share similar interests, experience, and background. Our tendency is always to connect with people that have our similarities. So as you're looking at applicants, that you're connecting with businesses, it's important to also be aware of that you're not just connecting with businesses that meet your interest or your experience or background. And then finally, there's the halo effect, where we get very impressed by a business or an individual, something that they've done. So then we put them on this impressive pedestal and so forth. So these are just some of the few things when it comes to unconscious bias for us to look at. Another things to look at is, being aware of people's diction, their articulation, and delve more into the information. try to get to try to understand what it is you're experiencing, try to understand what is going on with the experience, with the their application, and try to more empathize and try to really be conscious of the things that you're thinking. Next slide. Other biases, your reaction to religious statements, and if someone brings up, you know, God helped me to do this or so forth like that, those are things people may, you're not a Christian or so forth, you may be put off by it. Everyone communicates differently. So, you know, it's more important to kind of delve into all of the information. Don't penalize people for not providing more information or providing less, or someone may be more articulate than others. The other is the responses may differ based on the applicant's business size and industry and the resources they have available to them. Next slide. So how does these biases show up, right? So to help you to better understand some of the things that happen, there's a wealth gap, right? So if you look at what's happening with COVID, right? When you look at those communities that are really experiencing systematic disparities, COVID only shined a light on the disparity. So some of the things you'll see is like the wealth gap, which is a major factor in our research that's showing that even in households with similar financial resources and home equity doesn't translate equally to startup capital for Black businesses and, you know, white owners and so forth like that. There's some other information just to give you a sense, even though this is more the data is really towards the U.S. If you look at the data in the different countries that you're in, you will see that there is the median household income. There is going to be a difference. There's going to be a decline in there. There's going to be a loss of the percent of wealth that they're able to create, just as and these are factors as a result of the biases that people will project onto applicants. Next slide. Some of the other thing is the credit gap, the limited opportunity for wealth creation. So with this will show up in the application as far as the individual being able to have the resources or the know-it-all to be able to articulate or to give the, you know, a more robust answer or response, or showing up the way that the business should. It is not indicative of the intelligence. It's really indicative of what the lack of resources that these businesses may have. Next slide. And then finally, there's the trust gap. Because of the disparities of how they've been isolated, the lack of resources that they've not been able to get access to, the biases that people will project onto them, there is a trust gap that you have to be very aware of. So you have to make sure that you are making that connection so that you can be able to connect with them and better understand how the business is going on. So it's accumulated experience of institutional individual racism among those disenfranchised and underserved, Black Americans, or in different communities, and the historical culture of resources and scarcity in their community has led to them to develop more of a "we'll do it alone" mindset, because they're used to being, turned down for this, or not being included in this, or not being able to be a part of particular resources. And thus, when they show up and you see them, they show up very differently. So just be very mindful of these gaps that exist. Next slide. And so how do you reduce this, right? So one, let's emphasize with the viewpoints of the small businesses. Don't try your best not to compare and contrast between them, but really meet the business owner where the business is. Accept that we all have unconscious biases and just be very, very, very conscious of being aware of those. Monitor your own behavior. Question first impressions and then extreme reactions. And then finally, avoid assumptions. These are just a few small things that you can do to be helpful in helping the underserved, underrepresented to further be able to thrive. Next slide. What's the last? Thank you.
Can I just interrupt here, Hyacinth? Yeah, I just wanted to interrupt here, Hyacinth. I think this is really fascinating, and I think the two things that are very clear listening to you, Hyacinth. Number one, I think it's the need for a high level of awareness among people who are designing programs, and because you rightly said that there is unconscious bias, and if you want to do the right thing, this bias somehow is lurking behind, and sometimes you're not even aware of it. And the second thing that strikes me, even though most of our audience today is focused, their work is more on the developing world, what strikes me is also the fact that high levels of GDP or high levels of development do not mean that bias goes away. So it's not as if suddenly it'll disappear if the country has grown a lot. But I want to go back to the focus of today's discussion, which was really women-owned businesses. And I wanted to turn it back to you, Ariel, because in S4Y, one of the things we try to focus on is really the how. Yes, we are all aware that there are biases. Particularly, could you share a little bit how you are addressing this, this persistent, almost lurking, obstinate level of bias that we all have? Like it just doesn't go away, right? So how do you deal with it? Particularly, I want to bring the conversation back to women-owned businesses. How do you deal with that at the outset when you're designing your programs for women-owned businesses, Ariel?
So this is a great question. It actually ties into how Hyacinth and I met, which is when we launched our grants program, we recognized that we shouldn't be building this program in isolation. We should bring on experts in the field of bias, of sensitivity training. And so, enter the Association for Enterprise Opportunity. So we partnered with Hyacinth to think through across every element of the program design, of the strategic principles of how we were going to execute this end-to-end, financial allocation system. How can we ensure that we're eliminating bias to the extent that we can possibly engineer it out of our system? And for the people, for the vendors, for the contractors that are going to be a part of this program to actually deliver on it, training them up on sensitivity training and on bias training. So I do think that if there's deep intentionality up front, and the right partners who are experts in the field up front, in the room, in the engine room, making the decisions from the get-go, I think there's a lot of strength to be had there. So I think you're right. It's an awareness first, but then it's also how do you execute effectively with the right people in the room to address it from the get-go.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, you have to, for everyone that is involved, as Facebook did it wonderfully, as when the program, from the design of the program, they thought about it very intentionally. And when you think about awareness, what you have to, for women businesses particularly, you have to go back to the history, right? What are the things that women businesses have experienced detrimental to the growth or the start of their business? So once you understand why those things have happened, what is the result of them, when the business, it helps to kind of cleanse your palate a bit, to really understand those history. If you don't understand the history, you're doing that design in a vacuum. And even though you're talking about unconscious biases, you're still not very clear about what it is you're experiencing. So the history, having a very, very clear understanding of the history, why it's happened, and how it shows up is going to be very important as you're designing your programs. And Facebook did that very wonderfully throughout the entire process.
So, so if I understand you correctly, and that's a really good test. But if I understand you correctly, Ariel, before you launch your program, you have a sensitivity training for the program coordinator on ground, or the program team, I guess. Do you also have some kind of a awareness training or bias training for women themselves, perhaps? I mean, women running businesses. I mean, one of the things we find as we work across the world is a lot of women don't have the self-confidence that they can actually run a business. And you rightly talked about STEM, for example, even though scores show that women are as good, if not better, but they don't take that forward. They don't really believe that they have the capacity to, let's say, follow a STEM course. That's one example, but also in a business. So do you take it to that next level too?
Yes.
I mean, that's biased too, in some sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think to Hyacinth's point, like, we all have the first step is that. We have a public training for women and for anyone else who wants to take it, called Be the Ally. Internally, we also have more extensive learning and development resources, particularly for people managers, because we see that a lot of bias, and particularly in corporations, can be perpetuated at the middle management level. So we have managing bias trainings for people managers, and it is something that we go to market with. Part of frustration, and I think certainly for women on the call, we've experienced this firsthand, is when you see media, Hollywood films, advertising, you see stereotypes perpetuated about women. And so one of our goals for this year is, how can we help eliminate that harmful bias in the content that's being produced, especially on our platform? And how can we raise awareness of that? So there's some, the GM Institute on Gender and Media has a tool that literally looks at transcripts before Hollywood movies get made, to say, okay, is this actually a stereotype being perpetuated of how a woman is characterized? What is she doing? What is she not doing? How much speaking time does she have, et cetera? And what we've seen too is that when businesses are able to take a more a mixed gender approach to even the casting of their advertisements, they see better business long-term goal for us. As you can imagine, this is going to take some time for really making a change across businesses, but I'm very optimistic that we'll get there. I think you're on mute still.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to ask you a little bit. You mentioned that you are right now hosting a survey on your platform to collect data. Could you say a little bit more? I mean, I'm sure a lot of my colleagues would have like their ears like that, in terms of what is the kind of data that you're collecting? Where are you collecting this data from? I mean, what are the countries involved? What kind of data is it? What's the frequency? Could you share a little bit more?
So we have a number of, we run what we call on, so to reach the community. We have a state of gender survey. We have our small business state we run. Have specific, survey to get information on features that they're being built and how communities will run them. I will share, and I can actually take this as a follow-up after this meeting. I can share what is publicly available in terms of even again, I go back to this grants program, also survey the grant applicants to understand what are their needs, how do they think about growing their business, are there to want, because all of that signal ultimately helps inform the ways in which we build and create. So yes, I will send that through. We do have a lot of surveys, and we certainly try to not fit our community by over surveying them. But I'm happy to share with you following this.
I mean, one of the things we've realized with COVID is that digital collecting data digitally has become so important because you're just not able to do the face-to-face sort of collection of data. So any insights that you might have gathered would be really welcome. I mean, we would love to know more about. There's a question in the chat box that says, "I understand that you provide initial training for women, but once engaged, sorry, I lost the box. Yeah, once engaged in a program, do you also provide support along the way to help women-owned businesses on tackling bias that they experience as business? So do you travel that journey? Because bias go away because you a 2-week sort of bias, right?
Great question. So what I'd say is let me start with your earlier point, which is
You're going in and out. Yeah, I'm sorry, but your voice is fading in and out. I don't know why that is. Yeah, maybe try again. Yeah, go ahead, say something. Everybody else, I think, if everyone else can switch off their cameras, I don't know if it's we are overloading the. I don't know if that helps. Ariel, you're muted. You're also muted, Ariel.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Coming in
Go
better?
ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think there's to share. So one is the way that survey questions are not really matter. So this is sort of a as folks on this call drop surveys. I raise and a sub-signal that you might be stated by the time. When you think about these keys, like she means like elevate, and the business owners that come is absolutely meant to be a journey, not a one. Throughout and how we age. So around Mystery Month, around and we bring to people throughout the year, so they language always learning and growing.
Yeah. You're still fading in and out. I mean, I got little bits of bits and pieces of what you were saying, but maybe I'll move to the next question and hope that the voice is much. So here's another question from Anita from Youth Business International. She's asking, do the inclusivity programming principles apply across Facebook's global grant giving? And if so, are there any significant regional adaptations you take into account? YBI has a focus on young entrepreneurs. So do you have considerations regarding youth? Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. And I was thinking about that too, jumping off from what Hyacinth was saying, that it's really important to understand constraints, but context-based constraints. And so I was wondering whether you adapt your programs. You said you're active in about 30 countries. What are these regional tweaks that you make to your program?
Yeah, I'll answer it, and I'd also love for Hyacinth to weigh in as well. So we have many people on the ground on customer insights and customer nuance, and frankly have the open dialogue with policymakers, with business owners as to what they need. So we call it customer centricity and sort of customer obsession, but we're constantly thinking about how can we, whether it's localizing the examples, certainly broad translations across everything that we're doing, but how can we really ensure that we're resonating with people that we're serving in more a new challenge, because everything is remote. It's not like doing in-person activations and events the way we used to, but we're still pulling through, businesses from localities that can best represent their impact to the audience in a way that's going to resonate the best. But what we saw, for example, with grants that we ran in every corner of the world, because we recognized that businesses all needed money to get through. Actually did 30 markets around the world for grant giving, and made sure that we reach people with marketing, with advertising directly, so that they'd be able to know about the grant program and apply directly.
I know that we talked a bit about inclusion and bias when it came to Black-owned businesses. We talked about women-owned businesses. There's another category of underprivileged people. I mean, we've begun in S4Y to do a lot of work with our team in bank, and one of the things that we're looking at is bias against people with disabilities. So there is a disability, there's a physical, sometimes a disability, and then there is a bias about that disability. So I mean, to build on that disability, there's also a bias. If you've looked at that and how you have, whether you've been intentional about some of these biases, that when you look at somebody who has a disability, your mind says something to you, and you say, "Oh, this person can't just do it," even if that's not true. So could you share a little bit how you've tackled that, both you, Ariel, and also Hyacinth, in your work? How do you include people with?
Yeah. So have a group of employees and our cultural awareness for differently abled people. I think that there's a few ways in which so when you think about with summer presentations, like what more can we do to actually build inclusivity around differently able start? Also goes back to the bias piece and what I mentioned earlier about antagonists in media are represented, and frankly we don't see a lot of to recognize that that's part of humanity, and we have to embrace optimistic accelerated ability to have online and to be more in a way that's going to be very productive for only abled people, because now we recognize and commute to work. So I'm hopeful that actually opens the aperture of our ability to hire people who are differently abled. Hyacinth, what are your thoughts on removing this bias?
Sure. So I think, just in general, with any bias that's out there, I think it's important to understand that it's just not a one and done. So it's not, let's have a training here, and build awareness here. It's something that you have to be continuously mindful of, and intentionally infuse opportunities to keep these biases at the forefront of people's minds, so that you have, so people are very intentional about the decisions that they're making, whether it becomes with hiring or with business owners. Now everything is on, digital, where previously you may have just had a phone call and you may not be able to see the person, but now everything is on digital, everyone's on screen. And so some people tend to make those biases, make those instant and not be aware of them. So it's just making sure that you are infusing the intentionality of making sure that you are keeping it on the forefront of your staff's mind about the biases that exist, and making sure that they're being conscious about it. And then also just having a double check, always do a feedback loop to make sure with any programs you have, or if you're hiring or so forth like that, just do a feedback loop to make sure that you're sussing out those biases that may exist.
If I can follow up with you, Hyacinth, it was very interesting for me to see that your title is Vice President Innovation Engineering. And I was struck by that word, and I was curious if you might want to share an example of like a particular, because in S4Y this is this type of information and insight that we are hungry for always. Like, we are trying to grab at this micro tweak that you make in a program design that sometimes can be transformational. Sometimes the innovation doesn't have to come at this mega macro level. It comes in these little tweaks that we make to how we do things. So I was just wondering, from your innovation engineering hat, if you might want to share something, a problem, whether it was about including people with disabilities or women-owned businesses or even Black-owned businesses, whether there was a problem and something specific that you did at a really minor micro design level, which had an impact. I don't know if you wanted to just share something there.
Sure.
So on the spot, but I love the title. I love your title.
So sure, I will. So one of the, I'll just tell you. So one of the individuals that we were, one of the businesses that we were working with, are the individual showed up, and during our survey, we were doing a focus group, and the individual showed up with a head wrap, and as the individuals was talking, he as it was going on, he had a gallon of milk and was drinking right out of the gallon of milk. So what we started to see was that the facilitator would just skip, his hands would be raised, everything, and would just skip right over the individual and just go to someone else. So finally, I interject and I said, I would love to just hear from this gentleman. And the interesting thing is, you just giving that moment, just recognizing that it was happening, right? And just providing that moment for the individual to speak and to hear the comments and so forth that was so particular, just was very germane and very, very helpful to the other entrepreneurs that were in the room. Because when we went into our breakout session, that's all people could talk about, was the fact that he had a head wrap on and he was drinking milk from out of a carton. And one would not think that, you would never think to yourself like, oh, that's a bias that I've just experienced. But in there, we then had to, address the bias first before we could even go further into the breakout room. So I think one of the things I'll say to you, and I probably said it earlier, it's really, you have to just be very, very, very conscious of what's going on, and it's really just little small things that you can do, to make sure these things are not there. Just as you're making any designs that you're making for business owners, when you're thinking about the user, doing a human-centric design, making sure that you're looking at, for example, users of all disadvantaged, education, resources, etc. Make sure you have diversity in whatever it is you are doing, so that you're able to better create more thoughtful, more robust, more inclusive products that will serve entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Hyacinth. And actually, your point reminds me that a lot of our partners in the impact portfolio, it's very interesting. A lot of them, as we talk to them about new things that they are trying, several of them of late have really started focusing on mindfulness and meditation and this whole thing about extremely high levels of self-awareness, even among young people. I think it really comes from a constant sort of awareness about how you're thinking and whether you are. We are all subject to biases, and so I mean, I just remembered that several of them shared the importance of just training young people to be highly self-aware, even about awareness about your own skills. Will come from that level of sort of reflection and awareness. I'm going to open it up. I know we have just a few minutes left. Actually, we have just 3 minutes left. There is a question in the chat box. While anybody else who wants to ask a question, please jump in. But I do want to also put this other question out there, which is in the chat box from Sunamika. This importance of family support. This we actually, in our programming on gender, we have found this is really important to really make sure that the family acts as a support system and is sort of enrolled in and supportive of what we are trying to do. So do you also reach out to community actors and families as you build your programming? And then as I asked that question, I also wanted to open it up to see if there's anybody else who wants to jump in, either through chat, or if you want to just unmute yourself and ask the question, feel free. And while people are thinking, maybe you can take this question on family support.
So certainly, a goal perspective, I am hopeful that paid maternity leave becomes that we can all have in this world. It's the year 2020 after all. And I think that, as we build for family inclusion and understand the role that women play, not just at work, but in their personal lives, that's a no-brainer. At Facebook, we have paid maternity and paternity leave, and they're the same amount of time, so that we have equity built in from the start. But I think that's a really important element here. And again, it goes back to the design principles. Number one, number two, for specifically for mothers specifically, when you think about building a program, are there capital carve-outs and quotas being met specifically for women who are mothers, and how can that be part of the design up front so that you get it right? But I think there's a long way to go from a family perspective, because I think we're still seeing the burden of childcare and the role it plays in holding women back from their career, and frankly, other sources of capital, even during a COVID pandemic, where women felt duly burdened by being at home as a mother and as an employee.
Hyacinth, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So the adage comes to mind, it takes a village. So when you think about the family, being involved in a program, it's one, making sure first that there is added value that the family can contribute. And that added value, whether it be a support system or, being a cheerleader, to there's specific skills or, resources that the family can have, especially if the family were previous entrepreneurs, or the family had specific experience, making sure that you are able to draw from that, and really, being intentional about how you're including the family and making sure you're very clear about the contribution that family could make, because that could be a double-edged sword where it can be detrimental as well. So being very clear about the inclusion, and making sure you're is kind of a support circle that the individual experience is going to be important. So if you're including family in conclusion, you really need to make sure first that you're intentional about it, and then making sure they're aware of what your expectations are, so that it is really driving the goal that you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time, but I wanted to say a big thank you to the two of you for this really wonderful conversation. Thank you, Ariel, and thank you, Hyacinth. And thank you, everyone, for joining. I know January is not particularly, we are still sort of shaking off our winter break and, just coming back to sometimes such a huge inbox. But I'm really happy that the colleagues were able to join, and we will share the recording with several others, and continue to be in touch with you, Ariel and I. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much, Namita. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Hyacinth.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.